The town of Ash Bluff lay still that evening, save for the restless cry of crows circling above the dust-choked street. The horizon bled with the last fire of the setting sun, painting the wood-plank storefronts in long shadows that stretched like fingers toward the gallows-shaped trees. Folks gathered in clusters near the auction block, where the old preacher's bell tolled not for prayer but for trade, and the smell of horse sweat and kerosene drifted heavy on the wind. It was here that Ezekiel Boone came riding in, tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, jaw cut from stone in silence. The townsfolk parted when they saw him, not with respect nor fear, but with the wary curiosity a man reserves for a wolf prowling too close to the fire. Whispers rose like weeds behind his back. "That's Boone, the lonely one. He's near 40 and still eats alone. Talks more to cattle than to people. Some say his land owns him more than he owns it." Their voices, though hushed, carried plainly in the dry air. Ezekiel ignored them, his boots striking heavy when he stepped down from the saddle, spurs jangling a rhythm like a slow drumbeat. His eyes fixed on the platform where 3 women stood, brides, though no church had sanctified their place. Women promised a man who had not come. Women traded like mules, women whose names already tasted of shame. Among them was Margaret Hale, pale as winter milk, fingers twisting the hem of her faded dress. She had traveled far by wagon, promised to a shopkeeper in Santa Fe who never showed. Left stranded, left to be laughed at, she now trembled under the gaze of the crowd. She had the look of someone torn from home too young, carrying the brittle dignity of the abandoned. The sheriff, Alden Crow, stood nearby, arms crossed, hat tilted back. He caught Ezekiel's eye with something between warning and pity. "Boone," Crow said, low enough not to stir the crowd. "Don't do what can't be undone." But Ezekiel was already moving forward. He stopped before the platform, boots planted in dust, and looked up at Margaret. He didn't leer like the others, didn't sneer, didn't laugh. His voice, when it came, was quiet but heavy, like stone sinking to the bottom of a well. "You'll give me sons." The words were plain. Not sweet, not tender. Duty wrapped in need. A bargain, not a poem. Margaret's breath caught. For a moment, her eyes darted left, right, searching for escape. Then she saw the faces of the crowd, mocking, dismissive, hungry for her humiliation. And she saw Ezekiel's face, carved with loneliness deeper than cruelty. He looked not like a man reaching for conquest, but for something that might keep him from sinking into the earth altogether. Her lips trembled. Then, slowly, she nodded. The murmurs from the crowd rose into open chuckles. "She won't last a winter with him. A lamb for the wolf. Boone don't need a wife. He needs a grave beside him." Margaret's cheeks flamed with shame. She kept her chin low as she stepped down from the platform, carrying only a small bundle of belongings. Ezekiel didn't touch her, didn't reach for her hand, only turned and walked toward his wagon. She followed, each step heavier than the last. Sheriff Crow's voice called after them. "A wife's more than seed and labor, Boone. Don't break her." Ezekiel gave no answer, only tipped his hat, and led the mule team out of town. The wagon rolled steady into the night. The road stretched long and empty, dust lifting behind like smoke from a dying fire. Margaret clutched her shawl tight, knuckles white against the chill that seeped into the prairie after sundown. She did not speak. Ezekiel's hands gripped the reins, knotted with rope and callus, and he too said nothing. Silence pressed between them, broken only by the creak of wood and the distant coyote's cry. Once, he gestured with his chin. "That ridge yonder? Boone land begins there." Margaret followed his gaze. The ridge loomed under moonlight, lonely as the man beside her. No lantern lights, no neighboring houses, only endless land stretching into darkness. It filled her with both awe and dread. She was stepping not into a home, but into a wilderness. Hours later, the house appeared, large, weathered, built by hands too rough for finesse. Its walls leaned against the wind, its windows dark. A barn stood half-collapsed nearby, and the sound of restless cattle carried faint from the pens. Inside, the house breathed emptiness. Furniture scarred by years, dust gathered in corners. A place more lived in by silence than by men. Ezekiel lit a single lamp and set it on the table. Its glow reached only a little way, leaving shadows thick along the walls. Margaret set her bag down by the door, unsure if it was hers to enter further. "Kitchen's through there," Ezekiel said, nodding once. "You'll find bread on the shelf." He took a seat at the table, shoulders slumped like a man carrying years too heavy. She sat at the far end, nibbling bread though her throat was tight. He didn't press her with talk. He didn't smile either, but when she shivered, he rose without a word and fetched an old quilt, laying across the chair beside her. That night, Margaret slept in a room that smelled of cedar and dust, the quilt pulled tight, her heart thrumming like a bird trapped in a box. The days that followed were no kinder. When she walked into town for flour, the women at the general store fell silent, then whispered where she could hear. "Poor thing, bought by Boone. She won't last till spring. She'll be nothing but a broodmare on that ranch." Martha Weller, the innkeeper's wife, leaned close with a smirk. "Don't expect love from him, dear. Men like Boone only know land and labor." Margaret kept her back straight, though the words stung like nettle. Sheriff Crow watched her pass with something like pity in his eyes. That evening, she returned to the ranch house with her silence. Ezekiel noticed, though he asked nothing. Instead, he left another quilt outside her door, folded neat, as though he had heard without hearing. It was in the small gestures that the ice began to thaw. One morning she found her chair mended, the leg that had wobbled now steady, though she had never asked. Another day, a chipped mug was replaced with a newer one, set at her place at the table. And once, on the sill by her window, she found wildflowers in a tin cup, awkward, crooked, but alive. Ezekiel spoke little, but when he did, it was slow, considered, each word heavy with meaning. He showed her how to saddle a horse, how to mend a fence, always careful not to touch her unless necessary. When she stitched his torn shirt one night, her fingers brushing rough cloth, he looked at her long and steady. His nod carried more weight than any thanks. Respect took root where shame had been planted, but the world did not leave them in peace. One night, as the moon hung swollen, the thud of hooves shook the dirt road. 3 drunken ranch hands circled the house, voices loud and cruel. "Boone's got himself a lamb. Let's see if she bleats." Margaret froze, terror crawling her skin. Ezekiel stood, rifle in hand, and stepped outside. His shadow cut against the lamplight as he raised the barrel. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He only stood silent as stone, the rifle steady, until the riders' laughter turned brittle. One by one, they wheeled their horses and galloped into the night. When he returned inside, his jaw was hard, his eyes still burning. His voice broke the silence, deep as thunder. "Ain't no man gonna shame what's mine." Margaret looked at him then, truly looked. For the first time, she saw not just command, but protection. Something inside her stirred, fear giving way to fragile trust. The storm came 3 days later. Rain slashed sideways, wind tearing at the roof. Shingles lifted, beams groaned. Ezekiel climbed out with hammer and nails, bracing himself against the gale. Margaret followed, skirts soaked, hair whipping in the wind. Together, they held board steady, hammers striking in rhythm with the storm. Lightning split the sky. The roof shook under their weight. Her foot slipped on the slick wood, and she cried out as her balance gave way. But Ezekiel's arms caught her fast, pulling her against him, rain pounding their faces. His hands trembled not with desire but with restraint. Their eyes locked, time slowing as thunder rolled distant. She whispered, voice raw, "I'll give you sons, Ezekiel, but not just because you asked. Because I choose." His silence shattered. He bowed his head, pressing his forehead against hers in the rain, a reverence deeper than words. The storm raged on, but the house held. And when it passed, leaving the land soaked and glistening under the stars, they remained side by side, no longer strangers. That night, the ranch no longer felt empty. They sat on the porch, steam rising from mugs of coffee, silence now soft instead of sharp. The cattle lowed in the distance, and the stars burned brighter for having endured the storm. The narrator's voice, an old soul whispering across time, closed the tale. We are not shaped by the laughter of townsfolk, nor the bargains spoken in dust. We are shaped by the small mercies we dare to give and the hands we choose to hold in the storm. Remember that when the world names you unworthy, sometimes trembling leads to belonging,